Hello everyone, and welcome to the first real devlog on Negative Time, a bullet hell, time-traveling top-down shooter inspired by Enter the Gungeon that I'm making with my friend Golden Disguise. Technically, this isn't the first devlog I've made on Negative Time. I made a video about its origins as a game jam game if you want to check that out. But this is the first devlog now that we've decided to develop this into our first Steam game. Link to wishlist the game in the description. Now, what are we going to cover in this video? I don't really even know. This video is kind of unscripted, so I'm just going along and covering as much stuff as I can based on what we did over the last few months, because it's been kind of a lot. We tripled the number of weapons in the game, and we added a bunch of cool and unique new enemy designs that I think you'll really like. So without further ado, here's what we added to Negative Time since deciding to make it into our first Steam release. At that point, we had just decided to make Negative Time into our first Steam release instead of our other game, Wizards in the Woods. Wizards in the Woods was a lot larger scope-wise than Negative Time was, so we both decided it would make more sense for Negative Time to be our first foray into the world of making Steam games than Wizards in the Woods, which is a larger scope multiplayer game that's going to take a lot longer for both of us to create. So, at the start of October, we switched our focus to Negative Time. First, we needed to decide what exactly the scope of Negative Time would be. We knew it was going to be smaller than Wizards in the Woods, but how small exactly? Well, as it turns out, Golden Disguise and I had different ideas on what we wanted to add. I really wanted to add new systems to the game, things that would really expand upon what was already in the game with the whole Negative Time concept and add to it. So, for example, I was kind of hoping to add lore and story that would be communicated through like dialogue with the bosses just before you fight, or maybe a shopkeeper, also adding like items and stuff, things like that. I was really into adding new systems to the game. Versus Golden Disguise was mainly thinking to add new content on top of the systems already existing. So, for example, we already have weapons in the game, let's just add more weapons. We already have enemies, let's just add more enemies. We already have bosses, maybe add more bosses, maybe mini bosses or something like that, right? That was his direction, and scope-wise, he felt like that was a lot more realistic to complete in just a few months, since that was how long we were ideally hoping Negative Time would take before we switched back to focusing on Wizards in the Woods. So we decided to kind of compromise. We would start with his stuff, and then switch to my stuff if we had time. So his stuff was going to be worked on over the month of October, and then we would switch to my stuff if we had time in the month of November. That was what we decided on at the start of October. However, unfortunately, October kinda came and went, and we didn't really make much progress. We found some periods of time to work on the game, and I managed to add a few miscellaneous things like a control rebinding menu, and some other UI changes as well. And we did get to start on adding a few new enemies, but we didn't really make that much progress. Mainly, it was just we didn't find a lot of time to connect. It was spooky month, we each had our own things going on, and when we did find time to connect, I find at least that I work a lot better on a project when I am focused on it for a short period of time. That's kind of why I like game jams so much, because you're working on one thing for a few days and you're putting all of your time into it, so every minute counts, and every minute you know exactly what next to add. Versus if you spend that same number of hours over the course of like a few weeks, each time you come back to the project, you have to refamiliarize yourself with what you were working on, and it provides more opportunities to second guess yourself, which I have a huge problem with doing, where every time I return to the project, I'm like, wait, was this thing that I was doing even a good idea? And usually it's just better for me to make it and then afterwards look at it and be like, was that thing a good thing? Was that thing a bad thing? If I'm second guessing everything I add, then nothing will get added. So yeah, October came and went with not much progress. So November started and we were really focused on working on the game and specifically getting enemies done. And we managed to do it. We managed to add 4 new enemies to the game. We add the choir, which is a support enemy that sings at enemies around it to buff them. So it increases the enemy's movement speed, their attack speed, as well as adding resistance. And I just think this enemy is really cool. I really like their animations, thanks to Golden Disguise. We also have the idea of whenever they're singing, them adding like a choir part to the song that's currently playing. That currently isn't in the current version of the game. and we'll see if we have time to add it, but I think it would be really cool. Yeah, just a really cool support enemy. We also add the Limitator, which is this guy who's pretty simple, just teleports around you and shoots at you. Just a really cool enemy in my opinion. Wasn't too difficult to add since its behavior was relatively simple, at least by comparison to the other new enemies we added, including the Electrocutioner, probably the most complex enemy. It doesn't even shoot you, instead it shocks other enemies around it with lightning, which might sound bad. It doesn't actually hurt the other enemies, instead what it does is it connects those enemies with lightning walls that you cannot touch. If you touch, you will get hurt. So it creates this like chain or web of lightning around the other enemies in the room. So the idea is it's kind of like an area controlling enemy by blocking off certain routes depending on where enemies are. And this actually was a really fun enemy to try and implement. I ended up using a computer science data structure that I learned in my computer science data structures class, which I didn't think I would be using for a game ever. Graphs, specifically nodes and edges and stuff. I was using algorithms that I learned in that class to create the graphs and store them, using data structures to store them. Like, I believe I used an adjacency matrix, which I'm just really surprised I was able to use that from my class in like an actual, you know, game context. I thought that was really cool, and it was really fun to get to use that. But the thing about the Electrocutioner right now, I'm not super happy with its name, number one. And also, it's kind of weak right now. Right now, you can't roll through the lightning walls, which I think feels really bad. But if you were able to roll through the lightning walls, then they would be even weaker than they already are. They're already extremely weak, just because a lot of times you circle around enemies and you group them all together, and then the lightning walls are basically useless. So that's kind of a bummer. Might need to buff that enemy or figure out some way of changing it so that it's more powerful. But I think concept-wise it's still really cool, and I'm still pretty proud of it. And lastly, we added the Inverter, which was actually based on a comment we found. Someone suggested the idea of rewinding bullets, like you shoot it into the wall and the bullet comes out of the wall back into the gun, which I think is really cool. We didn't end up going that direction exactly, but we did decide to take the concept of bullets coming towards enemies instead of away from enemies, and created the Inverter, which is kind of like a little black hole that sucks bullets into itself, which I think is really cool. We also added a visual indication for their bullets. Their bullets are hollow in the inside, which means they can go through walls. Since the Inverter's bullets spawn really far away from itself and potentially in a wall, they need to be able to go through walls, and we visually communicated that with a hollow center, which I think is cool. We also have other visual indicators for all the different bullets in the game that mean different things, like square bullets bounce, don't question it, diamond bullets accelerate, things like that. Anyway, those were all the enemies we managed to add. Not that many, but each of these enemies took quite a lot of work by comparison to all the enemies in the base game, since all these enemies had way more complex behavior. You know, the Choir was a supporting enemy, so it didn't just shoot you, it had to hide from you, it had to buff other enemies, we had to add the functionality for buffing enemies. The Limitator teleports, which was still relatively simple, but more complex than just moving normally. The Electrocutioner obviously had all of the lightning connecting code, and the Inverter obviously shot bullets in a weird way and also had to eat bullets, which was a whole different thing we had to add. So yeah, we have some weird enemies to add, and that's why it took so long. So by mid-November, we had finished all those enemies, and it was looking like our goal, which was we pushed back the goal so that we would be adding all the stuff Golden Skies wanted to add, like the new content, by November, and then my stuff by December. It was looking like that wasn't going to happen. Over the course of the rest of November, we managed to add most of the new guns we wanted to add, but not all of them. And so in December, we finished the rest of the new content and unfortunately had to stop on the stuff I wanted to add, which was unfortunate. Kind of the lesson I feel like over these last few months has been estimates that you put are almost always wrong. If you estimate things are going to be done by a certain month, it's usually going to be the month after that, or the month after that. It's like nothing I estimate, at least for myself, ends up being correct. And you just kind of have to accept that. You kind of have to be flexible enough, but also not just be like, oh, okay, it's going to be done whenever it's done. Because if it's done if you never set a goal for yourself, then at least for myself, I won't be able to put enough pressure on myself to actually work on the game. I won't find enough motivation if I don't have those artificial deadlines, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a balancing act. Anyway, After finishing the enemies, we added the guns, and I'm really happy with all these guns. We added quite a few guns. I won't go through all of them, but I'll just go through a few of my favorites. The boomerang is a really fun gun. It's self-explanatory. It's just so fun to do trick shots around walls with the boomerang, honestly, is my favorite thing to do. It also has this bug, actually, where if you shoot it at a certain offset from yourself, it will loop around twice, which was a bug, but we've kept it because we just think it's really cool, and it's an opportunity to do more damage, and it is consistent. It's not RNG. It's skill-based, therefore, and it's just really cool. You can also control which direction it comes out of you by moving in a different direction. So it feels really intuitive to trick shot with it, and it's just super fun. It's not actually that good, I don't think, but it is really, really fun. Another gun that's really fun is the wand. It is just, I mean, you could just look at it and probably see that it looks fun. It shoots these like chaotic, wiggly bullets that track where your mouse is. And you can collect a whole bunch of bullets in like this chaos orb and then send them all at the enemies. And it just feels really fun to use. I really like this weapon. It's a little overpowered, I would say, but it just feels really good. It's a little weird to control, like all of the bullets you can see move really chaotically, and part of that is because they wiggle while they're tracking your mouse, and also because they accelerate, so they become harder and harder to control over time. But it still is relatively intuitive to try to control them, and it just feels so satisfying to use when you manage to blast an enemy with all of your bullets. Really fun weapon, I'm really happy with that one. Another kind of gimmicky weapon we added is the portal. Now, portal was actually a weapon in the original base game, but it was more like a laser gun. So what we did was we changed the functionality of the portal so that it actually spawns portals, and then gave the laser functionality to the laser gun, which makes more sense. So the portal gun creates portals that shoot bullets from it. Also funny that's called the portal gun. I mean, it's just called Portal, but it's, you know, reference to Portal a little bit there. So that's fun. Yeah, just some really fun guns. I'm really happy with how we added them. We also have different categories for guns. We have magic, ballistic, and weird, which I just think is such a cool category. We were struggling to come up with what the last category would be, and I love that we ended up just deciding on weird. It's such a good category, and it provides us so many cool opportunities to make wacky weapons, like the boomerang, for example. And another weird weapon we added is just called Big Block, which is just this big cube that you hold kind of haphazardly and just slam into the ground into enemies. It's like a big melee weapon. That also has bullet deletion, so it deletes bullets just around where you slam it, so you can kind of use it to block bullets. And when you slam it into the ground, it stays there and acts as like a little bit of cover that you can hide behind as you're shooting things. So it's kind of like a defensive weapon in a way. It's really weird, but I really like it. So yeah, really happy with how the weapons turned out. And with that done, that was pretty much all the new content we added. The only other thing we added was we started working on mini bosses. We wanted to add mini bosses to the game that would be halfway between the main big bosses in the game, and we managed to work on one of them, which is the Bailiff, which is this big guy who's kind of geometrically shaped, kind of like the Sentinel and the Enforcer from the base game, which are also geometrically shaped. We call them the Geometric Boys. So this is like a big version of those guys. And he has arms that are disconnected from his body as he does animations like swinging his sword or shooting his gun at you, which I think turned out really good. Of course, that's all thanks to Golden Disguise. Those animations are awesome, really cool. I'm really happy with how the Bailiff turned out overall. So yeah, that was really fun to create, and that was the last bit of new content we added by the end of mid-December, which is when we took a break over the course of the holidays. However, there was one new system we added to the game by mid-December. I was really looking forward to trying to revamp some of the systems of the game, and, you know, of course, we were pushing off most of that until the new year. But one of the things we decided to do was we decided to mess around with enemy spawning. Basically, a problem I was noticing with the game is the whole negative time concept implies that progression is through surviving longer, right? Because as you survive longer, you can get further into negative time because you build up your interval, and the only way you can build up your interval is having a large amount of time, right? So you build up a lot of positive time, then you get a lot of negative time, and in negative time you get better weapons so that you can get better in positive time. So going further in time is a form of progression, okay? And the problem was in positive time, to get more time, you could just AFK. Now, we fixed that after the game jam by adding the jury, which is an enemy that specifically comes after you if you AFK. But in my opinion, I feel a little weird about the jury. The jury feels like an enemy that's specifically there just to punish you for a specific strategy, and of course that strategy is not very fun, and we don't want people to use that strategy. I just would like it to be just the game design encourages fun strategies, as opposed to we have to add new elements to discourage the unfun strategies, if that makes sense. So I was thinking about the concept of negative time, and like, how do we actually encourage people to go forward in the game when they could just stop and sit around and not have any enemies come after them? Well, I was realizing the problem was the fact that surviving as long as possible is not something you have to worry about in the game right now, since the only way you could face new enemies is by progressing into new rooms. So I thought, well, you're trying to like escape this place, right? Well, you shouldn't be able to stand around then. People should be actively coming after you. So we decided to add enemies spawning over time. So if you stick around in a room too long, or just in general, enemies will be following behind you. So if you're playing slowly, you're going to fight more enemies and it's going to be harder for you. So that was an interesting decision, and I really wanted to finish that system before mid-December so that we could play test it over the course of December. And it's a mixed bag. Playtesting it, definitely some issues. One issue you might see already is how do you determine when a room is cleared if new enemies are flooding into the room? Well, we decided to add a system with room keys, so one random enemy in the room will have a room key. However, that enemy that has the room key that will unlock the room is predictable in the sense that it's random upon generating your seed, but then every time you go to that room there afterwards, that same enemy will have the room key. So you can memorize who has the room key, kill that enemy, move on to the next room, which I think adds to the whole idea of this game of, oh, I'm retrying the exact same dungeon. Now I know what best strategies to use because I know where the enemies are, I know exactly what the room layout is, I know exactly what's going on, right? Which is kind of a whole aspect of this game that I think is really cool. So I think that just adds to it. The enemy spawning over time, the negative with it, I would say, is it feels RNG. Even though it's not, it's also related to the seed, so it's predictable which enemies will spawn. But it feels RNG, and I don't know exactly how to fix that yet, so still gonna need to experiment with that a little bit. I like the overall idea of it, but I haven't quite figured it out completely. But yeah, that was all of the new content and new systems we added by mid-December. It's now January 9th as I'm recording this, and we're going to be starting to create more frequent devlogs as we get back into developing the game, since, you know, it's no longer Christmas break. We are still hoping to release the game fairly soon, so the beginning of this year is still the time frame we're looking at. So during that time, I'm going to be releasing more devlogs, hopefully more often and more in this style of devlog, which, if you can't tell, is unscripted and mostly just talking about the stuff I added as opposed to recapping it in a more highly edited video. I know that that might put off some people, but I just cannot release highly edited recap videos as frequently as I want to be releasing these videos, since there's that much time before the game releases, and I would like to keep you all up to date on what we're actually working on. So yeah, expect more videos like this. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to wishlist the game in the description if it seems like something you're interested in, and subscribe if you want to see more of these devlogs. And yeah, I'll see you all later. Bye!